Welcome everyone to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I'm the advertising manager and I'm your host today. We want to thank our sponsor today. It is the Peachtree Hand Spinners Guild here in Atlanta, Georgia, and they are honoring one of their own in Linda Jarrett. She was a wonderful member of several guilds around here, and I'm so excited that Peachtree Hand Spinners is honoring her today. This is for you, Linda. As always, if you will put your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. We love your comments. Those are great, but I don't always see the questions if they're in the chat. So if you would put them in the Q&A, that would be great. Today, we are excited to have Paula Vester. Paula, for 43 years, Paula has been spinning, weaving, sharing her love of fiber with others, as well as researching, experimenting with yarns and dyes and techniques. She's organized public exhibits, regional and national conferences, children's summer camps. She's taught workshops nationally. Paula presents programs in art, quilting, sewing, knitting groups, schools, colleges, and she's demonstrated at the Georgia Renaissance Festival and at the Georgia National Fair, where she was the supervisor of the spinning and weaving competition since 1998. Paula works to help fiber artists and fiber producers come together to support the continuation of the fiber production in Georgia and the Southeast. For more than a decade, she has focused on natural dyes and processing kudzu. If you're from the South, you're so excited that someone's finding something for kudzu. She's learning how to weave it, and she's sharing her adventures in fiber wherever she can, in person and in print. Hi, Paula.
Hello.
There she is. How are you?
I'm doing well.
I'm so excited you're with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, what is the first question? Here we go. You've already ahead of me. What is your favorite tea?
Well, my favorite tea of all is a decent Southern sweet iced tea. That's my favorite tea. If you're talking hot tea, I'll drink a lot of different ones, but my favorite's a good English tea with sugar and cream.
There you go.
Yep.
Very English. Would you share with us how you got started in fiber?
Well, when I was 8, I learned to crochet. I learned to crochet one chain, which went around our house, and that was it. And I learned to tat and sew and all the other things, but crochet and knitting I wasn't very good at till college. And my roommate taught me how to do those things a little bit, not much. And as a young mother in Savannah, Georgia, I needed a job. And there was an ad in the newspaper that said, wanted someone who can spin, weave, plow with a mule, and cook on a hearth.
Plow with a mule?
Plow with a mule.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't do any of that, but I applied and convinced them somehow that I could learn, and they hired me. And the mule went to mule school and flunked out and never learned to pull a plow. So I learned to spin and weave and cook on a hearth. And that's how I got into this.
Well, for your sake, I'm kind of glad the mule flunked out. So it's interesting because you've talked about all these things that you do. So I'm curious, are you a dyer that knits, or a knitter that spins, or a spinner that dyes? How do you see yourself?
I'm a spinner who dyes.
Okay.
And everything else is kind of a perk. That whatever comes after the spinning and the dyeing is kind of a little bit of magic that happens, and it's fun and I enjoy it. But if you give me a choice, I'm going to sit at my wheel or stir a dye pot.
So how did you start spinning?
Well, at the center, at Oatland Island Education Center in Savannah, they put me in a room with a pile of last year's shearing, dirty, a pair of hand cards, a book that was 35 years old and a spinning wheel, and said, this was Monday, and said, Saturday, you're going to demonstrate spinning. So I learned to spin, sort of, a thread. And on Saturday, I sat on the front porch of the cabin and tried spinning and carding and talking to people. And I really talked a lot so that they didn't notice how many times that thread broke. Yeah.
I love that. That's great. That's great. You're so brave. You're so brave. But you know,
I was young.
Yeah, I know. You teach a lot of topics. And I envision you like coming across a fiber technique and saying, I'm going down that rabbit hole. Until you know it well enough, kind of like you were talking about, you know, you took that week to learn how to do it, that you go down that rabbit hole and you just work on it long enough so that you can share it with the world. Is that your approach?
In a way, often, like at the center, we would say we're going to shear the sheep or we're going to talk about cotton, and I'd have to research that and learn about it. Often I get an email through my website, or I get a question at a guild meeting, and somebody says, what do you know about this subject? And the next thing I know, I'm saying, well, I don't know a lot, but I'll find out. And I go searching for that information. And sometimes I search enough and give it back to them and I'm done. But a lot of times it's something that kind of piques my fancy. And the next thing I know, I'm really practicing it or reading more about it and experimenting with it. And there I go. And it used to be I would spend time in libraries. I would spend time at historic sites talking to people. And now I even have the internet, which we didn't have back then. But I would go to university libraries and historic sites and use their libraries if they let me. And really, I would go anywhere I could learn something. And I still love to do that and talk to people and watch people and practice.
Do you use taking classes much, or do you find that you teach yourself more?
I used to take a lot of classes. I'm not a very good student anymore because I hate to admit it, but I tend to think, why did she do it that way? Why did he say it that way? But I've taken lots and lots of classes, and I appreciate all the teachers that teach because it can be difficult. And if you have a student, sometimes you just don't want that student. And I'm probably one of those students, but I still take classes. I still take classes. There's so much to learn. I don't have enough life left to quit learning. There's too many things.
Well, I have to tell you, you are not my first guest who has said they're a lousy student. So there's probably something in that's a whole master's thesis that we could get.
Exactly.
Well, one example of going down the rabbit hole would be your natural dyeing. And as we see here that we've got some examples here of your natural dyeing. And this is cochineal, right?
Right.
Okay. What's the attraction for dyeing for you? I mean, when I talk to people, some people are like, they like the control of getting the color they want. Some people love the experiment of it. There seems to be lots of reasons. What's yours?
Mine is the history and the science of it, but I'm not a scientist. although I would have been a better chemistry student if they had taught me this instead of whatever they tried to teach me, because I don't remember any of it. But I have learned a lot about chemistry in my dyeing. I started dyeing because we were at a historic site talking about life in South Georgia in the 1840s and what people were doing when they did not have, you know, a Kroger down the street and a Macy's and all that stuff. So I kept asking more about history of the dyeing and what were people dyeing in Georgia with, what were they using. And so I've always been fascinated with the history of it in everything. Everything starts with me with the history of it. And like this cochineal experiment was an exhaust bath from the Renaissance Festival.
Oh, okay.
And I hate to throw away a good dye bath, so I brought it home and put jars and changed the pH of the bath and added different additives like iron and copper and vinegar and different things. And that's what this was, just using up an exhaust bath. But Bonnie Carter and Jim Lyles are two of my biggest inspirations. And Bonnie is the woman who worked with me at Oatland Island, but she was an accomplished weaver even before Oatland hired her. And she taught me not only to go down that rabbit hole all by yourself and drag anybody who will go with you on that journey, but not to be afraid to just do it in the kitchen. And Peachtree emphasized that when I got up here, we'd be sitting around, let's do a dye pot, just on the spur of the moment.
For those who don't know, would you talk a little bit about the Renaissance Festival?
The Georgia Renaissance Festival started in 1985. It is an open air theater and craft show with 1530s theme. We've gone through many stories over the years. They have live theater going on different stages, music acts and jugglers and comedy and fire breathing and tightrope walking. And then you have the royal court and you have jousting and you have the spinners and the weavers. And I attended the first year and thought, there are no spinners in the village. Where are they? There was a spinning wheel in a shop, but it was up on the wall. And so the next year when they had auditions, I called up the director and said, we just want to come and demonstrate and talk to people and tell them about us. And so we've been there since then. And we have built a booth where we do dye pots and we spin and weave, and the weavers have their own booth now, but some of them are part of our group too. But so we've been sitting and spinning tails for 37 years, I think, something like that. It's been a while. Yeah. And it's a lot of fun. Everybody should go at least once in their lifetime, along with 15,000 of their closest friends and total strangers. It can be very crowded some days, and it's rain or shine outdoors.
Well, did you have to do anything special to spin for that demo? Did you feel like you had to research it and be, authentic? that kind of thing?
Well, we're allowed to say we're the Peachtree Hand Spinners Guild. We meet in Atlanta. We'd love to have you join us. But when the actors are around, I tell the volunteers, because that's really what we are, we're kind of promoting Peachtree Hand Spinners Guild and fiber in Georgia generally. But I say, know that Henry VIII is the king, if that's who is our king, and who is his present queen. Don't, and to know a little bit about the history of what's going on in the world in 1533 or whatever year we are. And so I did want to know what the inventions were, what was going on in the world, what kind of technology, what were we dying with?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I talk to people at the fair, I often say, in your century, you do such and such. In my century, talking about 1533 or 34, whatever it is, this is what's happening. And so we kind of play the game, but we also can say, here's the information. This is all the knit shops in Atlanta. This is the groups that you might want to join, that kind of thing. I did a lot of research, and I give out to the volunteers that information every year.
Of course you do research. Of course you do. Well, you are a fiber explorer. I have to admit that. In doing some research on you and hearing some of the things that you talk about, you're not just going to sit there and spin, and you've got to go figure out things. So I saw this image. I want to show this image before I go on. Here we go. I saw this image and I went, what the heck is that? First, I thought it was spaghetti squash. And then it's like, no, I don't think so. So what kind of dyeing technique is this? And how did you find this? Explain what this is first.
Okay. It's pumpkin and pokeberries. And it's trying to reproduce a color that was developed around the 1860s in Serafina, Italy. And the color was one of the early synthetic dyes called Serafina pink. And it was very popular in the South right around that Civil War time. It could have been 1858, 1859, somewhere in that time is where this color was developed, when this color was developed. And so women in the South were dyeing all their fabrics, mostly wool. And I'm so sorry about that. Mostly wool. And they were using Serafina pink dye. Well, then the war started, and we had the blockade, and there were a lot of things that women couldn't get, luxuries that women could not get. And one of the things was certain dyes that were not developed here. So in 1863, published in newspapers all across the South, was a series of articles about how to get certain colors, not just this one, but other colors, how to dye your gloves black, how to get a certain kind of blue, how to get browns, how to dye fabrics, all different colors. And in the Natchez Trace in 1863 in Memphis, there was this article. Well, I found it when someone many years ago asked me to do a program on Civil War textiles. Oh. And this is a paper that was written by, let's see, it says, I think it was somebody's paper at the University of Austin, Texas. And she found all these amazing newspaper articles and published it. And so it is now available online, and you can read about all these ways to get all these colors. Now, the thing about being interviewed by a newspaper person when you're a textile person is you can say you take the plant material and you soak it and you do this and you do that and you add this and you do that. But he doesn't know that that's important in that order. So the instructions aren't very clear. So basically it says, scrunch up all the pokeberries, stuff them in the pumpkin, stir it up, stick your yarn in it for 6 days and pull it out, and you've got Serafina pink. So I had to try it, right? I had to see if it worked. And it works on wool. It doesn't work so well on cotton, but I'm not giving up yet. And it works on silk, but not as pretty as wool. But wool is magic anyway. So that's how that got started. And I'd been wanting to try it for a long time. So last year, and I think, yeah, last year in the fall, when the pumpkins came, I'd rather eat them, but I had to try it. And then I did all this experimenting. And I discovered you don't need the pumpkin. You can buy pumpkin puree, and it does the same thing.
Oh, really? It doesn't have to be in the pumpkin.
It doesn't have to be in the pumpkin, but it is
okay.
kind of fun putting
Yeah.
it in the pumpkin and getting all slimy and gross. But I did discover, because we ran out of pumpkins because the pumpkin season passed, you know. And so we bought a can of pumpkin and tried it, and it works.
Somebody wants to know, is that color pink color fast?
On wool, yes. On cotton, no, not yet. But like I said, I haven't given up. And on silk, it's not quite, but again, I haven't given up. Mordanting is an important thing, and I'm still experimenting with different mordants to make the other colors permanent. But on wool, it's permanency is a relative term in natural dyeing. But I do have some pokeberry dyed yarn in a rug that I wove in 1996, I think. And it's still quite magenta purple from all that time, but it doesn't sit in a sunny window. It doesn't get washed every week. So like I said, it's relative.
I admire your tenacity, just not giving up. That's amazing. Well, talk to me a little bit about color. How do you decide? That's not what I want to ask. How do you explore or determine the colors that you want, that you're going to use in your artwork? Do you have a system? I'm always amazed how artists come up with colors that they like.
Right.
And I saw this system and I was amazed by this. So can you talk some about what this is? Actually, this is not what I thought it was, but go ahead and explain.
But that's okay, because I have a whole series of pictures that I use that are natural dyed things, but I'll talk about those too. But I'll talk about where my ideas for the colors come from. A lot of it over the years has been historic. What is a historic dye, where they came from, what was being used at a period in a country or a place. I'm fascinated with how many different ways people could get reds and blues and yellows and greens with the plants and the things that are around them, and then how a whole system of trade developed in the dyeing part. So historic dyes are a whole thing that I could spend my whole life, if I wasn't easily distracted by my backyard, studying. So I used to pay the boys in the neighborhood 50 cents a bucket to gather all sorts of different dye materials, acorns, leaves, you know, pine needles, whatever was in the backyard and down the street. And so I would collect things. I call that my foraging time. Then you have what's in your kitchen. You have a whole color wheel, color rainbow of color in your kitchen cabinet that you can use and dye with. And in your garden, whatever you grow, whether it's the leftovers from your tomato plants or the tops of your carrots or the beets that didn't quite get as big as you wanted them, whatever, you know, the sage and the basil and the peppermint, everything has a color. It might not be a pretty color, and you learn which ones do. So everything has a color, yellow being the most common. So my color wheels that are based on dye projects look just like this, only everything is naturally dyed. About 50% of what's on these color wheels are naturally dyed. So though that can be, you know, a lot of that is natural. So I make my color wheels of my color experiments, and that's what I show when I do classes. I lay them out and say, these are colors that have been made with nature. These color wheels I call my memory wheels, because in cleaning out my yarn from 43 years of spinning, I decided it was time for me to stop saving 5 yards of this and 10 yards of this and 2 ounces and a pound of this. So I was going to just give all my yarn away, because well, not all my yarn, all the scraps and things that I used to use in kids' programs. And I have a friend who teaches children, and it's perfect. My balls of yarn will weave a pouch or knit a sweater for a teddy bear or whatever. So I decided I wanted to keep a record of my yarns. So some of these yarns are 30 years old. Some of them are, there's a couple that comes from an exchange where there was several of us that spun yarns and gave everybody a piece of it. So that's a whole section where, oh yeah, that was the yarn exchange we did in 1990 something. So that's my memory wheels. And my color wheels, sometimes they are a true color wheel with yellow, green, red, purple, blue, that a true color wheel. Mm-hmm. And some of them are an experiment only in one color, like all the colors I can get from curry, all the colors I can get from hibiscus, all the colors I can get from pokeberries. So some of those color wheels are kind of studies in one dye material. And in 2016, I took an inventory of my dye closet. And in my dye closet were 96 different dyes. So I decided to dye with everything in my dye closet. And I ended up with 292 skeins of yarn. Some of them are very similar in color, but you know, it was everything from South Carolina cypress bark to murex that a graduate student gave to a friend who worked at Emory from Morocco. And I had never been able to use murex before. It's that royal purple that people always think about when they talk about medieval purples.
Well, I think the memory wheels are a brilliant idea, because especially those of us who've been in the fiber business for a while, you're right, we got to do something with that, and it's painful just to throw it away. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I bet a lot of people will be looking into that.
Yep.
So this next one, you this is indigo. I'm not indigo. It is indigo. You've dyed this.
Yes, it is indigo.
But this is kudzu. And again, I have to mention this because y'all, if you're from the South, kudzu is taking over the world. It's everywhere. And people are always trying to find ways to use kudzu because it just grows in concrete. It will grow anywhere. And I just thought this was a great example of your kind of exploring and learning and figuring things out. So, but you didn't just go figure out. I mean, I took a class on how to weave kudzu, you know, how to make it into thread and stuff. But you took it a step further and you learned about the Japanese, because that's where kudzu came from, is Japan. I just think that's fascinating. Would you talk some about how this all came about?
In 1987, Rita Buchanan published the book, The Weaver's Garden. And in that book, there is, I don't know, a page and a half, couple pages on kudzu. And I thought, oh my goodness, you don't even have to plant that stuff. You can just go get it. And so I thought it was an interesting thing. And then sometime around 88 or so, I met a basket weaver named Regina Hines, and she worked in kudzu. And she had a book called The Book of Kudzu. It was written by two people, and they were talking about medicinal uses and culinary uses. And they had a little section on the weaving of it and the processing of it. And so I got that book, and I had Rita's book, and I thought, I'm going to do this. So I went and cut a bunch of kudzu and boiled it and stripped it off and got the wrong part and threw away the good part and kept the wrong part. And so I had to go back to Rita's book and look at pictures and go, oh, okay, that's what I did. And you're supposed to have a running creek to wash your kudzu in. So my husband built me a flume out of a PVC pipe. And I have what I call my artificial creek that I set up, and I can wash my kudzu in. And I started processing kudzu, and I did it however I could, as best I could. And in 2014, I think, I had met Junko Pollock. I think I had already met her by then. And we talked kudzu. And I learned about a studio in Japan where they actually have week-long classes. You can go and work kudzu with these people. And so I emailed them and started talking to them. And I had learned to do kumihimo, and I had learned more from a Japanese artist and learned more about this Japanese studio. And they said, oh, we're going to be in LA in a week. Can you come and talk? And I swear I got off the email and said, we're driving to LA next week to talk kudzu. So I met the Murrays and found out I was doing it right, at least, but I still need to practice a lot. But I love the idea of kudzu and the history of kudzu and the uses for kudzu. Next year is going to be a kudzu year for me, so I'm going to be processing kudzu again. And the indigo dyed piece was something that I really enjoyed doing. So I want to do some more dyeing, dye the fiber with other dyes. Yeah.
I just am sitting here in awe of, one, your bravery that you contact somebody in Japan and talk to them. And then how it just turns into you get invited to present at their conference. That's wonderful. That's such a, I don't know, not serendipity, but it's just an amazing event, and you know, a bunch of
Yeah, I
events.
was invited to come hear them present their program, which was exciting for me. And to actually get to meet them was amazing, and to
Yeah.
see their pieces. It's the Textiles Society of America. They
Oh,
have
okay.
every other year symposiums, and the one in LA. All I did was attend that one day because that's all I could do. But it was pretty amazing. Yeah.
Oh, it's great. That's a great story. Well, many artists teach their craft, and you're one of them. You're very much, you're very passionate about teaching, and or maybe I should say it's your mission, you know, that you want to teach what you know. So you complete this sentence. If I didn't teach, then
I would still be learning and experimenting, and probably be standing on some street corner trying to get people to listen to me and let me show them what I've just learned. Because sometimes I know that when I get excited about something, that I have seen people's eyes kind of glaze over and they're going, uh-huh, 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 uh-huh. And I'm just so excited about it. I can't help it. But I would still be running around trying to tell people, try this. Yeah, my goal is to, number one, have as many people as I can doing this by the time I'm gone, and just to keep it going, because that's we're continuing this line of people who have been textile artists and craftsmen, and everybody thinks it's a dying art, and I don't believe it is. It cycles. There are fewer and more and fewer and more, but somebody always is getting excited about this.
and you're there to help them with it.
If they are agreeable, yeah.
You do a great job of that. Well, one thing that's been interesting is we have so many guests who are writers, and you are a writer. And my first question is always like, why? That's a lot of work. But this time, my question was that this is an interesting title, and I don't think I've ever seen a title this interesting. And it's called At the Humming of the Wheel, a collection of textilely correct fairy tales.
Yep.
So talk about this book.
Okay. Demonstrations. When I started demonstrating, I couldn't spin very well. So you have to learn to talk to keep people's attention on what you're doing, but not noticing how badly you're doing it, or how many times the thread breaks and it goes flying into the spinning wheel, or how lumpy the thread is, or whatever. So the idea is to learn to converse with them and have a conversation with them and draw them in to you and doing this, whatever you're doing, whether you're weaving or spinning or whatever. And people always relate to old stories that they have heard. The biggest one is, oh, Sleeping Beauty, but they always think it's Rapunzel, or they think Rumpelstiltskin is Rapunzel, and Cinderella is Sleeping Beauty, and Snow White is whatever. So number one is to make sure they learn the proper story, and to make the story relate to what I'm doing, like Rumpelstiltskin spinning straw into gold. And he taught me how to do it, but I only do it at tax time because I don't want to destabilize the economy, that kind of thing. Or Sleeping Beauty, that was a quality control problem. And the story's been completely rewritten so that science and magic go up against each other in my story, in trying to beat out the curse. And the very first story in the book is one where I entered a contest to write a story. And so the craft fair is actually a story that I wrote. And so I just made that the first story in the book. But the rest of them are fairy tales that people might recognize, or, oh, I didn't know that one was a fairy tale, or I hadn't heard that one before. So I want them to be correct and use the tools and the terms correctly. But I also want the magic, and they're meant to be read aloud because they are written the way I tell them. And I started really telling them at places like the Renaissance Festival and cultural fairs, where people would sit or stand and listen to you talk for longer than a minute, So it's just a wonderful little collection of the stories I tell when I'm demonstrating. And I've been collecting myths and legends for the last 25 years. And hopefully, maybe sometime soon, those will come into book form.
Well, I think that's a very unique approach to stories. I love that.
And that's me at the Renaissance Festival on the new cover.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my garb when I was younger.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mandy, for showing that. You've talked some about the Peachtree hand spinners, and they are sponsoring this episode. Thank you, Peachtree hand spinners. And people have talked about how guilds are important to their career and how they got started and how the guilds helped and everything. But you were involved in starting Peachtree hand spinners. Can you talk some about why that happened and how it happened?
When I first moved to Atlanta, I was part of the guild in Savannah. There was a fiber guild, a weavers guild in Savannah that I joined. And when I moved to Atlanta, I was kind of cut loose. I still paid dues down in Savannah, but I didn't know about Chattahoochee yet. And so in the first year, I volunteered at the DeKalb Historical Society, and that's where I learned about Chattahoochee. And in September, because Chattahoochee starts up their year in September, I attended the first meeting of 1984 September, and Betty Smith was president of the guild at that time, and I attended, and a woman stood up and said, "We're going to start a study group of spinners, and if anybody's interested, see me after the meeting." Her name was Toni Friedman. And I don't remember what the program was. I don't remember, because all I could think about is, don't let her leave before I get to talk to her. I want to be part of this. I want to be in the spinning group, because I weave, but I don't consider myself, I don't want to offend other weavers in the fact that I weave, kind of. So I spent the whole meeting thinking about meeting Toni Friedman, and she wanted to get a spinning group together. And so in January of 85, we actually met at a shop called Dreamweaver. And there probably were about 15 to 19 of us at this meeting. And by February, 13 of us had paid dues. And Tony Friedman I was just one of those first 13 people. Tony Friedman was the mover behind the guild. By the second year, she had moved to Israel, so she is no longer with us. But she then went on to start a group over there. She started a guild over there. So, but she was the mover and the shaker. And it just happened that by August, the person who was going to do the newsletter moved out of town, and I took over the newsletter that August. And we had about 25 members by the end of the year. And we decided to run January to December. So by December, we had about 25 members or so. And that was the beginning of the guild. And we wanted to be a guild that was socially and technically supportive of each other learning, and to help other people learn, and to continue the knowledge of spinning and textiles through our activities. That is part of our purpose. As the guild, it's stated in our constitution that we really didn't have bylaws for years because we just wanted to get together. But we decided you have to have rules when people break, abuse things. So we develop rules when we have to. And that was 1985. And we are still building on our social activities and our educational activities and supporting each other in whatever we do. It's a very big part of my life. The guild is an amazing group of people, and that's why things like people like Linda Jarrett, who was a longtime member, but and others in the group, we have almost 100 people in the guild right now, and some of them are far flung. They are members, but they don't get to come to meetings. So, but they still join us whenever they can. So the Peachtree Hand Spinners Guild is a unique guild, and we're lucky, and we are coming up on our 40th anniversary in 25, but we're going to start celebrating next year. So we're going to celebrate for 2 years our 40th anniversary.
Good for you. Good
Yeah.
for you. Well, other than coming up with your 40th anniversary activities, what's next for you?
Well, I've got a list here. It's funny. I'm working on a Patreon thing. I've got a Patreon page going for World in a Spin. That's my business, is World in a Spin, and trying to figure out what to keep doing with the Patreon page. But I want to dye some black. I want to kind of perfect black. It's a very hard color, and I've got a lot of recipes to experiment with that I've been searching for. I'm still working on my kitchen dyes. You would not believe how many different kitchen dyes there are, and I then want to share it wherever I can. I want to weave a little bit. Winding a memory wheel of Linda Jarrett's thrums really made me want to sit down at my loom again. I've got a warp on that loom that's been there for 2 years, so I need to weave that off. And And I'm still developing class ideas. I'm still wanting to have a crochet along with a bunch of people, or let's make Christmas stockings in the summertime. Let's see how granny squares can get turned into all sorts of things. So I've got a lot of things going, and like I said, next summer is going to be my kudzu year. So come about June is when you start cutting kudzu and processing kudzu, and you process it all summer long, and then come winter you can weave it.
Oh, okay.
If
I
you
had known
work
that.
hard.
That was good.
Yeah, so that's I'm sure there'll be new things. Somebody will ask me a question and I'll start something else.
Going down that rabbit hole.
That's right. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, we have
Lots of different things.
We got a bunch of questions, and some of them
Okay.
about some of the things that you've already talked about. So,
Okay.
Oh, Ellen Puff wants to know, do you do drop spindle?
I do. It was funny because I used to, when I taught beginning spinning, I made everybody start on a drop spindle.
Uh-huh.
And that was before drop spindles were very popular. And people didn't realize, because the first drop spindle I ever had weighed 8 ounces, and you got to spin rope on those. You know, you cannot spin good knitting yarn on an 8-ounce drop spindle. So first thing I did was I learned a little more about the physics of drop spindles, and people have come so far with drop spindles. They are tools that I believe, I get excited when a bunch of people have shown us their yarn that's been spun on drop spindles. And that's why we have a spindle spun class in our spinning competition at the Georgia National Fair. So drop spindles are portable, and I love that. I'm not as serious as some of the young women in our group right now, but I live vicariously through their yarns.
Nancy Cars wants to know, do you heat the pokeberries prior to putting it in the pumpkin?
Nope.
Okay.
I ferment them with vinegar.
Oh, okay.
Maybe overnight, and then dump the whole thing in the pot. I mean, in the pumpkin. I do stir the stuff in the pumpkin just to get it unstuck from the side and to kind of make juice in there.
Okay. Could you please write down the name of the thesis on color from the Austin student so we could access it? She mentioned online.
Oh, let's see if I can. University of Texas Dyes in Civil War Era Newspapers.
So if someone Googled Dyes in Civil Wars newspaper
era newspapers, they will find it.
All right.
And it's the University of Texas, and it's a PDF that comes up.
Okay.
And some of the recipes don't work. Something's missing from them, but that's that whole thing about being interviewed by a newspaper person.
Right, right. This is an interesting question. It says, wondering who is the we in the story about the Civil War blockades for the dyes for the Seraphina Pink. Very interesting, but who couldn't get the dyes?
The person that kind of came along the journey with me on this is a woman named Heather McCloy. She's also the author of Dyeing is Not Alchemy, that she and I published back in 2003, years ago. But I taught her how to spin when she was 15. She was in the band with my children, high school band, and I carried a spinning wheel or a drop spindle with me to all the games that I chaperoned. And during the football part, I spun, and during the halftime show, I watched the show. And she was a knitter and wanted to buy some of my yarn. I said, no, but I'll teach you how to do it. So I taught her how to spin. I taught her how to dye. I taught her several things, and then she kind of flew and has learned so much. My son and Heather are adults now. It's been a long time, and she travels these journeys with me, and we go off on these tangents together. And so she and I are the we in this journey of poke and pumpkin. And so I'm continuing it. She has moved on to a few other things, but I'm still trying to figure out how to mordant these other fabrics. But she does a lot of these experiments with me.
April Price wants to know, what mordants do you use for your natural dyes?
Aluminum sulfate is my favorite for wool.
Okay.
Aluminum acetate is my favorite for cotton. But a relatively new, it came out of Germany in 2009, so it's not new, but I only saw it being offered at Botanical Colors in the last 2 years, maybe, is aluminum triformate. And it works on wool, silk, and cotton very well. And
really?
It is a room temperature, like aluminum acetate. You don't have to cook it. You just let it sit overnight in the bucket after you have dissolved the mordants in those two things. And so in 24 hours, I can get my cottons and my silks ready to dye without cooking anything. And it's much easier than the aluminum sulfate and the tannin, and the aluminum sulfate and the tannin, that kind of thing, and easier than soy milk, which I have used, and it works. There's another one that is so exciting for me because I'm impatient, but I went down the mud dyeing study when Carlos Museum asked me to teach a summer camp, and then COVID shut us down, but that didn't stop me from trying the mud dyeing thing. And I found a Japanese company that provides mud dyes of all different colors, and they have a fixative called Bengala fixer, and it's ready in 5 minutes. And so I thought, well, if I can use it for mud, can I use it for other natural dyes? So I did some experimenting, and you can use that Bengala fixer for cottons in 5 minutes, and it dyes beautifully. The one thing is your yellows are not clear yellow, like your saffron yellow and your chamomile tea yellow and your Osage orange, going to have a little earthy tones to it. So if you want those clear yellows, aluminum acetate is a great mordant. Sorry to make that so long.
No, it's great. We have so many questions today, and we're out of time. Can people go to your website and leave you a message or ask a question there?
Yep, that's
Okay,
where I get a lot of them.
People want to know about those circles, and it's a great story. I want you to be able to tell them where they can get those. And there's more questions about dyeing. And Teresa Roosh, hi Teresa. I'm going to ask this one because I'm curious too. Would you compare the kudzu woven fabric hand to other fiber?
Okay, my kudzu woven fabric is more like if you were to buy raffia, which is a basketry material, split it thin, weave it. That's what mine feels like and looks like. But when you look at the Japanese fabrics, they are more like linen fabrics because they strip them much finer than me and they tie them very carefully. And I don't always tie my ends. I'm practicing. I have to watch the videos over and over again every time. So it was worn like linen.
Okay.
And they use a silk or a cotton warp. One of the brown yarn that was the warp on the placemats on the pictures, that was a linen, and the blue one was actually a silk warp.
Oh, okay.
And I have some cotton warps on Kudzu, but in Japan, the kimonos that are being made are often silk warps or fine cotton warps, and they look and wear like linen. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on here today. Oh, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here today. We do appreciate it, Paul. I could talk to you about this for days. I mean, there's so many things you're involved with. The conversation go on and on and on. So here is her website, worldinaspin.com. If you have more questions, and I know you do, and I'm sorry we didn't get to them today, be sure to go to website and ask her, especially if you want more information about those wheels. It's a great story. And so check out her website. And also there's more information about her and her work and everything she's involved in. It's a great website. We do want to thank our sponsor today. Again, it's the Peachtree Handweavers Guild. And in memory of Linda Jarrett. Linda, I hope you're watching. We miss you. And the Guild, thank you so much for honoring her. She was quite a lady. We appreciate that. If you would like to sponsor an episode of Textiles and Tea, or your guild or your business, please go online to the Textile and Tea and on our website and go to Textiles and Tea, and you can see where you too can be a sponsor. We appreciate everybody who makes this possible for us. It's the end of the year. Everybody is looking at where do they want to make that end of the year donation so you can get the tax write-offs. And I hope you'll keep in mind, kind of like, donate where your passion is. And I'm sure many of you here today, this is your passion. We are trying to match our donations from last year, which was $35,805. So we have been able to raise some money. We're at 30. We need to raise another $31,805 to match what we had last year. And that's our goal. And we think we can do it, but we need your help. So if you're thinking about where you want to donate this year, keep us in mind. If you're interested, you can go online and you can go to our donation tab and you can sign in there. There is a link in the chat where you can donate, and we do appreciate it. Your money goes to a lot of things. It helps Textiles and Tea. It helps Careers in Textiles, Spinning and Weaving Week. All of those programs are supported through donations to the Handweavers Guild of America. And those of you who have donated already, we thank you. And we thank all of you who will be donating to us soon. If you want to watch this again, you can go online at the HGA Facebook page. You can go to the HGA YouTube. I think almost all of them are uploaded now. If not, maybe one or two aren't yet. And I encourage you to subscribe, because when you do, you'll get a notice saying that a new episode has been uploaded. So I appreciate that. Next week, we have Alan Oliver. I encourage you all to join us next week. We look forward to it. Hope you have a wonderful week enjoying this holiday season. Thank you so much, and happy tea.